Welcome everyone. This is going to be my tier list discussion video about Summoner Wars 2nd Edition. And now that I've familiarized myself with each faction and how they play against each other, I feel like it was finally time to make this video. Um, I'd say in general, 2nd Edition is fairly well balanced out of the box. It's only going to take a few changes for a couple factions just to bring that balance closer. Now, especially when you compare this game to Summoner Wars 1st Edition, the balance is hugely improved. First edition was really poorly balanced. So yeah, this game's pretty good at a competitive level already, I feel like. And for asymmetrical games, it is really impressive to me how differently every faction plays here, and how just in general how close in power everyone feels. I do think that's pretty impressive. But yeah, let's just get right into it here. So I'm going to start with what I believe to be the strongest faction of the game right now, which are the Polar Dwarves. I'm putting Polar Dwarves in S tier. And when you're fighting against this faction, it just feels like you're up against this big, impenetrable moving fortress, right? And due to Savara's ability to move structures, she's able to move the fight to wherever she wants it to be, which feels very strong. And then whenever you try to attack her structure, she can reconfigure it and then counterattack you back, which is also hard to deal with. And then the other thing that makes her very good is that everything on this team in general just has very high health. Ice golems, parapets, everything very hard to take down. So it's just hard to take a single target down when you need to. And what brings them up to S tier though are their event cards. Specifically, it's going to be the Glacial Shift Ice Ram combo, no question. That combo is probably the strongest in the game right now. It's doing crazy amounts of automatic damage, and then it puts them into a good position afterwards. And then that's all before their attack phase even happens. And it's not even that hard, really, to draw that combo. So yeah, it's... And then what puts them, I think, in my number one spot, though, what really pushes them that high is the fact that you can combo two Ice Rams together. And the double Ice Ram combo seems to be the one thing that's a bit broken in the game at the moment. When you draw double Ice Ram Glacial Shift, you can literally just end games on the spot. It happens, it can happen in a decent amount of games. It doesn't happen in every game for sure, but even if it's a small percentage of games, that's really boosting her win percentage. That combo just does ridiculous amounts of damage and has just crazy reach. So yeah, that's one thing I think people would like to see changed. Yeah, if there's one nerf, that's one that I think needs to happen. But yeah, right now it's easy enough to kind of ban it in tournaments, and I think we'll start to see that a lot, where you just disallow two Ice Rams to be comboed together. Other things that make Polar Dwarves strong, I'd say they've got a pretty strong range game. Between the Frost Mage and Nadiana and Jarmund and even Savara herself, I think they're all doing pretty strong ranged attacks, and they can all be shooting through parapets, which means they're basically just shooting through walls protected, which seems really strong. And then their champion selection is really good. I love all three champions here. What's important is that they have 5-cost champions, and they have two 5-cost champions, and I think 5-costers are really important in 2nd edition. So yeah, a lot of flexibility with those champions. But the commons, on the other hand, aren't nearly as impressive, and I feel like in isolation the commons don't look all that impressive, especially compared to other strong commons in the game. But when they all come together, they at least do synergize decently well on this team, so they're at least decent. So across the board, I feel like Polar Dwarves are beating nearly every faction in the game, except maybe the Savanna Elves, which Savanna Elves could be even advantaged here. And maybe that's due to them having a lot of high health units plus good range game, and maybe it's just that unique combination that they have that can take them on. But otherwise, it's pretty rough for the other factions. Maybe next best would be Tundra Orcs, which also have high health, and they're pretty decent at taking out the focus firing on the ice golems, taking out the ice golems before they get a little too out of control, and that's kind of the main approach that you have to take to beat the Polar Dwarves. Next up, let's talk about the Breakers. Which Breakers I'm putting in A tier. I think Breakers are really strong. I say they have the strongest range game of all the factions. I think they're just playing this really annoying keep away style where it's really hard to get in against them, and you're just going to be losing a lot of units to close in. The other great thing about the breakers is that they can always switch to this assassination style to take out your summoner if they ever go down to low health. So they've got a really nice tool set to finish off low health summoners. They even have the option of playing an aggressive game from the outset of the match. So they have the tools to play aggressively and defensively, which is pretty unique to them. They're just maybe the most dynamic and flexible faction of all. Weirdly, they have maybe the worst epic event in the game in mind control, and one of the weaker summoner abilities in mind capture, which both of them don't really seem to support her main approach of playing a range game, a keep away game. But interestingly, they do allow for some good aggressive plays. So I have kind of mixed feelings on both of those, but I mean they give her some definitely some dynamic play, but at the same time it kind of goes against her playstyle. So I don't know really how I feel about those. Then I'd say the main area this team is getting most of their strength from is going to be from their commons and their event cards, and just how flexible they are really. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't really matter what kind of hand you draw. It seems like you can make any hand work. So like your hand isn't really getting clogged, and for that reason, I'd say like the breakers are having the least amount of hand management issues in the game. Which that's one thing I really love about them is that you're just not faced with a lot of these hard discard decisions like you might be with other factions. And just to give some examples of the flexibility of their cards, like Hypnotic Call, for example, like you can use that in hundreds of different situations. And then Perplexing Tempest, I think that's one of the strongest events in the game because you can use it virtually at any time, and it's always going to be good because you're going to be limiting your opponent's movement. And then even if you draw two Tempests in one hand, it doesn't even feel that bad because they can combo together. And then for the commons, like man, the Deceiver is always good. The Wind Mage is always good, and those two units combined can do some really nasty things, and they just create tons of flexibility just by themselves. Champions are definitely a weak point here. Like they're all expensive at 6 or 7 cost, and I'd much rather have a 5 cost on a team. So you're very reliant on Goldoon generally. Like Goldoon is kind of the MVP on this team, but I mean you can't just play him every game. It's not always possible. So yeah, champion strength is a little weak, but the commons more than make up for it, I think. If I'm looking at the matchups for the Breakers, I feel like they're all at least even to positive, except the Polar Dwarves, which that matchup is really tough. But importantly, I feel like they're the best faction at taking out Savanna Elves, and Savanna Elves are another one of the factions I think are the strongest in the game, which I'll get to next. But yeah, I think the Breakers are the most capable at beating the Savanna Elves in a range game. I feel like the matchup could be even. It could be even slightly in the Breakers' favor. I'm not sure. But against other factions, it doesn't feel like the matchups are way ahead for Takulu. It's just more like fairly close or just a slight advantage. And like in the case of the Fallen Kingdom, I think that's a pretty close matchup. And I think that's because the Breakers are having a hard time dealing with those undead carriers, which are very good against low health units. And generally, anything that's going to be good against low health units are going to give the Breakers a hard time. And then the other thing I think the Breakers can have a hard time dealing with are high health units in general. So like, for example, taking out the Tundra Orcs units can be a little bit tough sometimes. But so it's not like a breeze to beat the Tundra Orcs, for example. But they're at least like slightly ahead, I feel like. Moving on to the next faction, I'm going to do Savanna Elves next. And Savanna Elves, I'm going to put in S tier. I think Savanna Elves are one of the strongest factions in the game. Second only to Polar Dwarves, I feel like, and they're not too far behind. Like I think if you just remove like the ability to do the double Ice Ram event combo, I think Savanna Elves and Polar Dwarves are like neck and neck. It's really hard to say which one would be the best. And man, but Savanna Elves are, I feel like they're the only faction that's good in every area, every category. They're strong. Like the champions are good, the commons are good, events are good. Summoner ability also really good. So I guess what's hard to deal with when you're fighting them is that like Abuashi is able to give boosts to his units and kind of build up his units in the back if you give him time. So in a sense you're almost forced to get in fast, and you can't really be too patient against him. And then he's also forcing you in because he has a really strong range game, especially due to the border archers being an amazing common, and then Makinda Rue, an amazing champion. Spirit Mage is also good at range, and even Abuashi has a 5 range attack, which is also great. Uh, I'd say Makinda Rue, I think, is one of, is I think she's the best champion of the game personally. And for the value for the cost, I don't see how Makinda Rue can be beat. She's 5 cost for, and you're getting 9 health and potentially 4 ranged attack every turn. I think that's pretty ridiculous. And then Midi Kairu is also, some people say that Midi Kairu could be the best champion in the game too, which I think he's also very strong. And that's yet another 5 cost champion that's very dominant. But yeah, I tend to play Makinda Rue a lot more just because I think she's just so flexible. It's hard not to use her. Uh, and then I mean the commons, the other than the border archer, the rhino has gone up in my ranking so much lately. Like at first I thought I kind of favored the lioness, but over time the rhino, the ability to trample is very strong in this game because it's so common heavy. So I think that really improved my opinion of the rhino, and yeah, he's just an amazing distraction. Has tons of health for the cost. So yeah, great unit. Then of course we have to talk about the Chance of Power event and how that's one of the most threatening epic events in the entire game. And yeah, Chance of Power is just easily capable of doing like 10 plus ranged attack to a single target, which means that when you're playing against the Van Elves, you just can't afford to leave your summoner exposed oftentimes, even to one attack. So yeah, you're often playing way safer than usual, and you can't really always play optimally without taking some risks. Yeah, so yeah, Chance of Power is just, I mean, it's just really good at taking out summoners, champions, or whatever high value target you need to disappear. That's gonna do it. Matchup wise, I feel like Savanna Elves are really good because across the board it seems like they're positive to even in every matchup, and it's not exactly like they're crushing these other factions. It's more like they're just slightly ahead in most cases. So it honestly it wouldn't take much to balance them and to bring them closer to the middle of the pack. It would only take a couple minor changes, I think. Uh, but yeah, like hard matchups, maybe one of the harder ones are the breakers because they're the only faction I feel like that are capable of outranging you. And then after that, I feel like the other hard matchups might be like the cave goblins and tundra orcs, where those two factions in particular are good at very early offense. So yeah, that's one of the few weaknesses I think Abuashi has is dealing with that early offensive pressure, and those two factions are capable of doing that, particularly when they get the starting move. And yeah, I'm realizing I forgot to talk about like Abuashi having quite a nice advantage when he gets the starting move in this game. So that is kind of one other benefit that he has is that when he gets the starting move, he's got a lot of magic on the board to start, like 2 units worth 2 magic each. So that's one other thing that could maybe be changed. Seems like it's a little bit overpowered. It seems like at the start. Who do we look at next? Let's do Tundra Orcs. Tundra Orcs, I'm going to put in my B tier. I do think they are a little bit on the weaker end, even though they're still quite decent. And I think you'll start to notice a trend here where a lot of the more defensive range teams are falling near the top, and then you'll start to see that maybe the more aggressive melee-based teams are going to be falling on the bottom end. Which I just think inherently the more aggressive factions are taking a little bit more risks, even though in second edition a lot of effort was put into balancing range versus offensive melee. There still is a little bit of a gap, I feel like. So the Tundra Orcs playstyle, I feel like it's like this kind of cautiously aggressive attack where you don't want to push too hard, but you do want to be aggressive. And they're supported by a lot of high health units and a lot of high value attack. But they don't really have a lot of tricks up their sleeve. They don't have, and they also don't have too many ways of getting extra attacks or like extra damage with their abilities or their event cards in general compared to other teams. They do have some ways, but I think that's kind of one drawback of this team. They are capable of winning trades and winning in a potentially long economic game. And this idea is supported by Grognak and his high stats. So yeah, he's the healthiest summoner right now at 14 health, and he's also got great attack value at 4 melee attack. That means at some point you're gonna have to get Grognak involved in a fight to get some value out of him, and inherently there's gonna be some risk involved in getting Grognak in the fights. But yeah, the trick with this team is trying to use him at the right moment and not being overly aggressive with him. But yeah, and then I guess the other things that kind of support this idea of being able to win trades and stuff is that Shank is an amazing champion. I think Shank is one of the best champions. He's got, again, high health, high attack, and I think all three champions are fantastic here. They're all five costers, and once again, I love those five costers. Yeah, all three are fantastic. Commons not so impressive to me. I think they're all just kind of average, and the Smasher. If you can use the Smasher effectively, you could definitely get a lot of value out of him. If you can get a couple good 2 or 3 attacks out of him, yeah, Smasher can be great. Um, but yeah, like the Shaman's great as a shield, but it's not doing much attack. And then yeah, Tundra Fighter. I feel like there's better commons at the same cost. Like for example, the Undead Carrier has the same stats, but I feel like it has a much better ability. So that doesn't impress me all that much. But I don't feel like the units on this team in general are synergizing all that well, and they're just a little bit lacking in the commons, because I feel like it's very important in second edition to have a strong common set. And yeah, I don't know. I guess their abilities just like lack a little bit of trickery. All the units are very straightforward. You can telegraph their movement. Yeah, I think it's important that you have some tricks beyond just raw stats. And their events, I don't know. Their events are kind of sad to me. I feel like they've got the weakest event set in the game. Now I do love For Glory. I think that's a really strong epic event. That's boosting units' attacks outside of the norm, and that's actually giving their commons a lot of threatening attacks throughout the game. So that's a great one. But the other events are all very situational, and it's like you never know when you're gonna need them. And I feel like they're just not getting you out of a bad situation usually, like events from other factions might be. Brutal Force and Primal Fury are like kind of two areas where they do have some trickery with those two events, and can combo Primal Fury and Brutal Force, and potentially those could be that could be a game-winning combo, which is nice. That's kind of one area where they do have a trick, but I don't know. I feel like they just need a little more in this area somehow. But yeah, Tundra Orcs in general, like while I do put them on the lower end, I feel like they are still decent. They do feel decently powerful, and like the matchups that they're losing, they're mostly just losing it narrowly, in my opinion. Except I think the Cave Goblins matchup is really tough. But outside of that, it's the matchup spreads. It's actually not that bad. Next faction, let's look at the Vanguards next. And Vanguards, I'm gonna have to throw them in C tier. Sorry to say, Vanguards I think are the weakest team in the game. Certainly it's not unwinnable with them. They're very capable of winning. It's just that it feels like they're working a lot harder for that victory in most cases. And you tend to be playing very long matches, and this team specifically is going for a long economic victory, trying to outlast their opponent, and you're just navigating this minefield for a long time trying to win, and sometimes it could be a struggle. Yeah, Sarah's ability to bring back units from her discard, it does seem like it could potentially be very overpowered, um, which is why I think this is probably one of the hardest teams to balance in the game. And it's no surprise really to me that it's on one end of the extremes. And I think it would have been unhealthy for the game had she been like top tier, because this type of ability actually gets quite annoying, as we've seen in Summoner Wars First Edition with Demagogue's ability, which is very similar. So yeah, I'm kind of happy it's not on the top tier end, um, but I would still like to see some improvements to this team in the future. And I think the one big area this team's suffering in is that they lack in a range game, and they can't really draw their opponent in. But then again, if they did have a decent range game, then maybe they'd be too overpowered. So that's a delicate balance for sure. And let's see, their champions not so good. Jacob is probably one of the worst champions in the game. He could definitely be improved. And the other champions are expensive. And Colleen is quite good, but a lot of games that you're winning seem to revolve around good Colleen play and getting a lot of value out of Colleen. And Sarah, I feel like Sarah needs a little bit of improvement on her attack value because I mean you're forced to use Sarah a lot and keep her very active in order to win the game and get a lot of economic advantage. So I mean if Sarah had a little bit higher attack value, I feel like that could definitely improve this team a lot. And their commons, well, I guess they are somewhat predictable in their movement. I do think the commons are decent overall. Like the knight and the paladin can be quite good. The paladin can get you a lot of attack, and then the knight can protect the other units from a lot of damage. But um, yeah, I guess the trick is trying to find ways to kind of use these units efficiently, and that can be somewhat difficult because a lot of times you're forced to attack, and like I feel like they work better on defense. So when you're on the defensive, it actually does feel like Sarah is quite good though. And you do have some potential in the priest being able to heal units. Like for example, if you could heal a champion back up to full health, like you could potentially get a lot of good value out of that. But it does kind of suck that the priest is using up one of your attacks. Now the events, I do like the events, except mass heal, which is hard to find good uses for. But the other events are very flexible, very easy to use and hold on. It's easy to hold on to the cards and find good uses for them. Renewed Hope is a very interesting one because you're able to summon units at any phase during your turn, which is very unique and very powerful. I do like that one a lot. Now, admittedly, the Vanguards are my own personal weakest faction. I don't play them a whole lot, so I don't have a lot to say about them. I will say from my own experience that trying to go up against a faction with decent ranged options is quite difficult. So, like for example, the Savanna Elves or the Phoenix Elves or Polar Dwarves, like those matchups can be really hard. It can be really hard to fight efficiently and to kind of put your knights in a good efficient position. But when you're up against more melee-based factions, I feel like you definitely stand a better chance, and they can fight decently well. Okay, who to look at next? Let's do let's do Fallen Kingdom next. Now, Fallen Kingdom, I'll put them in A tier. I think they're a very solid faction. Now, they're a faction that have really risen up in my ranks from the start of this game. I used to kind of put them much lower, but we've seen lots of evolutions with this team, more so than any other. We've seen evolutions in their gate placement. Lots of interesting ideas with gate placement on this team. Like they maybe have the most flexible gate placement, and we've seen some really creative play from that. And then the other big improvements we've seen are like the optimization of using the undead carriers effectively, and like the carriers are really central to this team, and their ability to infect and to multiply basically is one of the core concepts, and using that effectively has really improved my opinion of this team. Another area I've seen improvement come from Fallen Kingdom has been from learning a particular play style where you could play like this very slow economic game with the concept being that you can actually use Rhett Tallis's ability of raise the dead to kind of stall the game, and then while you're stalling the game, you can slowly improve your hand and mitigate bad draws. So for a long time I was thinking that bad draws were a big problem for Rhett Tallis, but yeah, after I learned this new playstyle, I feel like I've been able to mitigate that quite a bit. So that's improved my opinion of them also. And yeah, so this actually means that Fallen Kingdom now, in addition to being like a good assassination team where they have all these surprise attacks, like they're also capable of winning in these long economic games as well. And so yeah, Fallen Kingdom, they're just a hard faction to talk about because they're just so complicated. They're definitely the hardest faction to learn and master in this game. There's just so many different approaches to playing Fallen Kingdom. I guess the best way I could describe them and describe their strength is that I feel like they could really dictate the pace of a match. So they can dictate if the match is going to go slow or fast, and their opponent is just going to have to follow their suit. Like, if your opponent doesn't match you, they're either going to get behind economically, or they're just going to get run over in a fast paced game. And then I'd say the real reason that you're able to control the pace of the match is that in general it's just too scary to attack the Fallen Kingdom. Like they have the most dangerous defense in the game, so if you ever try to attack them, like for example, they're playing like a slow, patient game. You're like, okay, I'm gonna attack and punish you for playing slow. Well, the problem is, whenever you get close to their gates, it's like you're just going into their death range, and you could just instantly lose, especially if your summoner's close by. So attacking them is very dangerous. So you just really have to let them come to you, and then they can just do that at their leisure, really. I'm trying to think of some challenging things that are facing this faction. So, okay, yeah, the main thing is really that hand management is very difficult with this team, and I think that just requires a lot of experience to know when to let go of certain cards, and when to keep cards, and how to build towards certain combos and stuff like that. And that just comes with a lot of experience, and a lot of that is to do with how all of their events are very strong, but they require a lot of coordination, a lot of other cards to kind of combo with them, or they require a certain board state. So you have to know how to coordinate everything together. Even still, after lots of experience with this team, I feel like I'm still struggling with the hand management aspect. That's something I've been trying to improve on. But I guess it's just the easiest way to describe this team. I feel like everything is good except the champions. Like, I mean, Dragos is a good champion, but the other one's not so great. They're all too expensive. And then, yeah, just this team just good at throwing tons of commons at your opponent. It's all about using Rhett Tollis' ability to raise the dead and just throw tons of commons at them, and use Pyre to heal him and do that even more. And yeah, undead warrior. That's an amazing common, because you're even able to do 7 melee attack with him, potentially insane. And then undead archer, man, the stats aren't great for the 2 cost, but I do like that ability. So this is I think they're a fun team, really fun, solid faction. Next up, let's look at the Cave Goblins. Now, I have a feeling this could be my most controversial pick. We'll see. But I think Cave Goblins are B tier. Well, I think Tundra Orcs are not as good as I'm putting them higher than Tundra Orcs. I do feel like they're beating Tundra Orcs and Vanguards, but everyone else higher, I would rather be playing the other factions that are higher than them. Especially Fallen Kingdom. I think Fallen Kingdom beat them pretty hard due to the carriers. But yeah, okay, Cave Goblins. How do we unwrap this one? Based on the initial stats we've seen from tournament play, Cave Goblins are actually performing pretty well. And then when I looked at my own statistics, Cave Goblins are actually still maybe my highest winning percentage faction. So, okay, I have to put all of that aside. And then, okay, when I look at how well I perform against other factions, like, I'm actually beating the Cave Goblins pretty hard, interestingly. So what that tells me is that, and what my gut tells me is that I think people are kind of approaching this matchup wrong in general, and because I think you need to learn a very particular style to counter the Cave Goblins, and like every faction is going to have to play differently from their normal style in order to beat them. So like I come from like a fighting game background, so I would kind of compare this to fighting against a grappler character in a fighting game, where you cannot approach it the same way or you're going to get destroyed. So you have to fight that match differently. So I guess the conclusion I've come to is that I'm expecting Cave Goblins to perform well at mid to low level play, but I think once you get to like higher level play, and as people get more precise with fighting against them and improving their defense a little bit, I feel like they're going to drop off just a bit. Now, that's not to say that they're not a strong faction. I mean, they are very capable of taking anyone out, and I think as anyone knows that has played against them, they are very capable of looking like an S tier team. But for me, it's a matter of consistency, and I don't think the Cave Goblins are consistently performing at that level. So it's just a matter of figuring out, on average, where are they performing, I guess. All right, so let's talk about what's good on this faction. So, Cave Goblins have maybe the scariest offense in the game. They've got amazing rushdown. They can swarm you and can really assassinate you very, very well. Once the board is filled up with tons of units, then that's where the Cave Goblins become really terrifying. Then they're able to maximize all of their event cards, like Enrage the Horde, their epic event, which allows virtually everything to attack again. And then the sneak event becomes very dangerous when there's lots of units, because they're able to make these crazy maneuvers to surround your summoner from extremely far away. And the unrelenting event is maybe one of the best events in the game. It's amazing at magic denial. And yeah, I mean, just having a turn where any commons go back to your hand, it really extends the life of their valuable units too. Then the commons are all synergizing very well together, I feel like, and I like that the slinger's giving you some free attacks, and the heart of this team is really the horde climber. The climber is opening up the doors to assassination because they're able to move through structures. So that changes the entire dynamic of the game, and the climber is the reason why you really have to approach fighting this team differently. You have to block spaces around your gates when you're fighting them, or put your gates more towards the back so that they're not as exposed, so the climbers can't use them against you. Then the Klinger and the Beast Rider are giving you some nice extra range and reach that this team really needs. And on the champion front, it's kind of mixed. It's nice that they have a couple zero-cost champions that could be used at any time, especially Blarf. Blarf is probably the strongest unit on this team, and it's very key to get him boosted up. And I love Sneaks' ability of being able to swap places. I mean, that's what really allows for assassination in this team, and then it also allows him to get a lot of value by like constantly being in the fight and then swapping back to safety. Okay, but even with all these positives I'm listing off, I feel like what's holding Cave Goblins back a little bit and what's putting them in B tier is that they're a little bit inconsistent, and I think they have the most hand management issues in the game. It's hard to get the engine started sometimes and to get the board flooded with units to where they really feel good. And I think that's mainly to do with you really need to get like an early gate for them to be really strong. In most games that will happen, but sometimes it's just not going to happen. And sometimes just the flow of the cards is not good. And the team really requires kind of the right cards at the right time, I guess, is what I would say. The other reason they're inconsistent is in large part due to them being a lot stronger when they get the starting move and go first, as opposed to going second. It's to the point where like even if you put them up against like a top tier team, I feel like they're easily going about even with most teams. But when they get the starting move, but when they go second, it does feel like a bit of a struggle. It's kind of hard to get things started, and yeah, so it is important to know that, like, if I'm playing in a tournament or something, like, I am worried about going up against a Cave Goblins player, even though they're in B tier. It's like, I'm really hoping that they don't get the starting move, because it's much, much more difficult to play against. Now we're left with just one faction, the Phoenix Elves. Yeah, I left the Phoenix Elves for last, because I feel like this is going to be the hardest one for me to place. Like, I'm debating between A or B tier. I feel like they're either bottom of A or top of B. I could be convinced either way pretty easily. Like, I definitely don't. They don't feel as powerful as like the top tier teams for sure, but they don't feel as weak as the ones down here. So they're just kind of somewhere in between. For now, I'll probably just leave them in A tier because I feel like Moldaria is pretty consistent, which is probably where I'm putting factions in B tier when they're more inconsistent. So yeah, if I'm following that same logic, I feel like they could be A tier here. They're just they don't really have the high highs that a lot of the teams have or the low lows. They're just kind of performing pretty consistently in most games, at least. I quite like Maldaria's ability to move commons next to her after she attacks. I think that's quite good, and it enables her to play like this game where a very minimal game where there's very few units on the board, and you can kind of just get the most out of every unit, which is nice. She's got a lot of events and abilities that are doing automatic damage, so that's really helping them play a consistent game. And yeah, I guess across the board, the champions, commons, events, they're all somewhere in the middle, kind of average. I feel like there's nothing too stellar here, nothing too weak. So it all kind of just balances out. Probably some of the highlights on this team, I guess you'd say the champions are quite good here. All three are strong, and they do have two 5-cost champions, which again I love. Especially Holios is interesting because she has a very unique ability to be able to summon units adjacent to her, which there's nothing else quite like that in the game. And that allows you to play a game where you're attacking on two different fronts, where she can be attacking in one area, your summoner could be attacking in another. So that's quite nice. And for the commons, I mean the commons aren't anything too impressive, but I think the Ember Beast is really good, and I guess just in general they're doing a lot of automatic damage, which is nice. And then of course Baldaria's ability is kind of key to playing the game efficiently, and like getting a lot of attacks with Maldaria is going to help win the game. Uh, but then that's kind of where I feel like she has some risk involved in playing this team, and that's why I kind of feel like maybe she's a little on the weaker end. Is that a lot of times you do have to risk Maldaria's life a lot in order to play efficiently, but she's got tools to keep herself safe, so that kind of balances out. I guess some of the struggles of playing this team are that they're not very good at taking out gates. Like their abilities aren't activating against structures, which maybe is a potential weakness. And then I always do feel on edge playing this team because Maldaria has to be pretty active in order to do well. So it always feels like you're kind of risking your summoner's life, but she's got a good tool set to be safe, and I like that she kind of has freedom to walk the board wherever she wants to go. So yeah, she has an interesting balance of some decent offensive surprises and some solid defense as well. But I don't have much more to say about Phoenix Elves, so I guess that's going to conclude my video for the tier list of Summoner Wars 2nd Edition. I'm pretty happy with the balance overall, and anything that's in the A to B tier range, I'm pretty happy with, and I don't think it's going to be very easy to fine tune the balance much more than that. So yeah, I just hope in the future we get to see maybe some nerfs to the S tier, maybe a little bit of help to the Vanguards down there. And yeah, thank you for watching.